In eastern Turkey, on a barren volcanic slope not far from the far more famous Mount Ararat, there's a formation that has puzzled and fascinated people for over 60 years. A boat-shaped outline pressed into the earth, roughly 500 feet long, with a pointed end and a rounded end, sitting in terrain hundreds of miles from any open sea. For decades, it was a curiosity, a strange geological coincidence that locals pointed out to visitors. In the past few years, a team of independent researchers using ground-penetrating radar has revisited the site, and what they've reported has reignited a debate that's been running for nearly 2,000 years. It's worth being precise about exactly who found what and how confident the actual science is, because the real story is more interesting and more complicated than a simple headline suggests. A shape that won't stop showing up in photographs. The site is known as the Durupinar Formation, named after Turkish Air Force Captain İlhan Durupinar, who first photographed it during a 1959 aerial mapping survey and noticed its unusually symmetrical, elongated shape standing out from the surrounding terrain. Early ground investigations in the years that followed concluded the formation was a natural geological feature, likely shaped by mudflow, lava, and water erosion, and interest in it faded for a while. It resurfaced repeatedly over the following decades as aerial and later satellite photography kept capturing the same distinctive outline, and the formation measures close to 515 feet in length, a detail that has always drawn comparisons to the dimensions of Noah's Ark as described in the Book of Genesis. The modern investigation. Beginning in 2019, a research effort called Noah's Ark Scans, based in California and led by an independent researcher named Andrew Jones, began conducting non-invasive geophysical surveys of the formation using ground-penetrating radar, along with electrical resistivity tomography and LiDAR mapping. It's worth being clear about who Andrew Jones is. He's a software developer and independent researcher, not a professionally trained archaeologist or geologist, though his project has involved collaboration with Turkish researchers and at least one archaeologist affiliated with a Turkish university. This isn't a mainstream academic archaeological excavation in the conventional sense. It's an independent, faith-motivated research project using real scientific instruments, and that distinction matters for how much weight to put on its conclusions. The radar surveys expanded and reanalyzed multiple times between 2019 and 2025, reported detecting angular, right-angled structures and what appeared to be layered, room-like divisions extending to depths of roughly 20 feet below the surface. According to statements from the team, later scans identified what they described as a central corridor running through the formation, along with side passages and stacked layers that they interpreted as potentially representing multiple decks. Jones and his collaborators have argued that natural geological processes don't typically produce consistent right angles and repeating rectangular compartments at depth, and that the regularity of what the radar detected points towards something built rather than something purely eroded into shape by water and lava over time, what the soil samples reportedly showed. Alongside the radar work, the team collected dozens of soil samples from inside the formation's outline and compared them against soil taken from just outside it. According to team member William Crabtree, a soil scientist involved in the project, samples from inside the formation showed roughly double the organic matter of the surrounding soil, along with elevated potassium levels, changes team members have argued are consistent with the long-term decomposition of wood. The reasoning is straightforward. If a large wooden structure sat in that location and decayed over an extended period, it would leave a distinct chemical signature in the soil around it, and the team has said their samples show exactly that kind of signature. The group has also reported finding what they describe as an unusually high concentration of what could be aged, altered organic material consistent with ancient timber. Though independent laboratory confirmation of these specific claims through peer-reviewed geological or archaeological journals has not yet been published as of this writing. The team has stated it intends to expand its soil sampling program and eventually pursue core drilling at the site to gather physical samples from underground rather than relying solely on radar imaging and surface soil comparisons. The anchor stones nearby. Separate from the boat-shaped formation itself, the surrounding area contains several large standing stones, some taller than an adult person, with holes deliberately carved through their upper sections. These have long been pointed to by arc researchers as possible anchor stones, the kind of large weighted stones that might have been used to stabilize an ancient vessel. Local communities in the region have passed down stories associating these stones with the flood narrative for generations, though like much of the rest of the site's folklore, their actual age and original purpose haven't been conclusively dated or verified through peer-reviewed archaeological study. An important caveat: independent research, not scientific consensus. It's genuinely important to separate what's being reported from how it's being reported. Mainstream academic archaeology and geology have not endorsed the conclusion that the Durupinar Formation is an artificial structure, let alone the remains of Noah's Ark specifically. The 1959 through 1960s era investigations concluded the formation was natural. And while the more recent radar surveys have produced data that the Noah's Ark scans team interprets as evidence of intentional construction, that interpretation has not been replicated or confirmed by an independent geological team publishing through standard peer-reviewed channels. Ground-penetrating radar is a legitimate and widely used scientific tool, but interpreting its output correctly requires significant expertise, and reasonable, similarly qualified researchers can and do disagree on what a given radar return actually represents. Rock formations, mineral veins, and natural fracture patterns can sometimes produce misleadingly regular-looking signals, which is exactly the kind of ambiguity that makes claims like this difficult to settle definitively without physical excavation and direct sampling. The team behind the current research has generally been careful in its own public statements to frame its findings as suggestive rather than conclusive, repeatedly stating that further testing, drilling, and independent verification are needed before any firm conclusion can be drawn. That caution is worth taking seriously, both because it reflects appropriate scientific humility and because the history of ark hunting is littered with claims that generated enormous excitement before quietly falling apart under closer scrutiny. A search with a long and complicated history. The hunt for physical evidence of Noah's Ark is not a new phenomenon. The first-century historian Josephus wrote confidently that remnants of the Ark could still be found in the mountains of Armenia in his own era, and various medieval and early modern travelers reported sightings of ancient timber high on Ararat slopes, particularly after rock slides or unusually warm summers exposed dark shapes beneath retreating snow and ice. None of these early reports were ever independently verified. In the 20th century, the search accumulated a long list of claims that generated headlines and ultimately failed to produce verifiable evidence. In 1876, traveler James Bryce reported finding a piece of worked timber at high altitude on Ararat, well above the treeline, though the discovery was never conclusively authenticated as ancient or connected to any larger structure. A widely circulated account from a man named George Agopian, who claimed as an elderly adult to remember walking across a buried wooden structure as a child in 1908, has been treated with significant skepticism by researchers, partly because the timeline and geography involved are difficult to reconcile with known volcanic activity in the area. A widely publicized 2010 announcement by a Hong Kong-based media and exploration group claiming to have found and entered a wooden chamber on Ararat collapsed shortly afterward, after observers noted inconsistencies, including notably fresh-looking straw and undisturbed cobwebs, inside a structure that was supposedly thousands of years old and had allegedly been buried in ice. Perhaps the most well-known figure associated with a modern search is Ron Wyatt, an American nurse anesthetist, who, beginning in the late 1970s, spent more than 2 decades and claimed to have located numerous biblical artifacts, including the Ark of the Covenant and what he identified as Noah's Ark at the Durupinar site itself. Wyatt had no formal archaeological training, and his claims were never accepted by the mainstream archaeological community, which generally characterized his methods as lacking rigorous documentation, and his conclusions as reflecting strong personal conviction rather than controlled scientific evidence. He remains a significant figure in the popular history of ark hunting, but not one whose findings hold standing in professional archaeology. A different kind of evidence from a different direction. Separately from the mountain searches, oceanographer Robert Ballard, best known for locating the wreck of the Titanic, spent years investigating a related but distinct hypothesis: that a catastrophic flooding event in the Black Sea region around 5000 BCE may be the real historical kernel behind flood narratives found across dozens of ancient cultures, including the Genesis account. Working with a theory developed by Columbia University researchers, Ballard used robotic submersibles to survey the Black Sea floor and, at a depth of roughly 400 feet, located what appeared to be an ancient, now submerged shoreline, complete with artifacts suggesting human habitation before the area was flooded. Radiocarbon dating of shells recovered from that ancient shoreline placed the event within a time frame some researchers connect to the broader tradition of flood mythology across the ancient Near East. This research doesn't point to any specific ark or vessel, but it offers a plausible explanation for why flood narratives appear so consistently across unrelated ancient cultures. A genuinely catastrophic, memorable regional flooding event, passed down and reshaped through generations of oral tradition. Where that leaves the Durupinar claims. Taken together, the current state of evidence at the Durupinar site includes a naturally boat-shaped landform first documented in 1959, later radar surveys conducted by an independent, non-academic research team reporting internally consistent right-angled structures at depth. Soil chemistry differences, the team argues, are consistent with decayed organic material, and a long history of similar claims elsewhere on and around Ararat that did not hold up under closer examination. None of that amounts to scientific confirmation that the formation contains the remains of an ancient vessel, biblical or otherwise. It does amount to a genuinely unusual set of radar and soil findings that, as of now, haven't been fully explained by conventional geology either, and that the research team itself says requires further drilling and independent verification to resolve. What's arguably most interesting about this story isn't whether the formation turns out to be a ship. It's how a single ambiguous landform, sitting on a remote volcanic slope, has managed to pull in independent researchers, professional skeptics, historians of ancient flood mythology, and oceanographers working an entirely different ocean, all circling the same fundamental question that has occupied people for roughly 2,000 years. Whether one of humanity's oldest and most widely shared stories has a physical anchor somewhere in the ground, waiting for the right instrument or the right excavation to finally settle the argument one way or the other.